Test, test. Maria, why don't you try and say something? Because earlier today we had some issues from the people in Zoom coming in too loud.
Here I am talking. Can you hear me?
Very loud. Yes, we can.
Okay, how about now? I'll just hold the microphone down.
Sure.
Okay.
That's an honor of Maria. It's very fuzzy.
Yeah.
I need to do a conditioning here, but mine got really dry.
Are we ready, folks? Ladies, are we ready? Guys, all good? All good. We will bring the committee of the whole meeting to order for May 2nd, 2022. Who wants to do the land acknowledgement? Mr. Bryson, thank you for that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We would like to acknowledge that the city and borough of Juneau is on Tlingit land and to wish to honor the indigenous people of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska Native people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We are grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Gunalshish.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Madam Clerk, will you call roll since we have mixed folks? Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, Mr. Bryson.
Present.
Ms. Hale.
Here.
Ms. Hughes Scandies.
Here.
Mr. Smith.
Here.
Ms. Treem.
Here.
Ms. Wall.
Present.
Wallachie Dog. Absent. Ms. Gladaszewski.
Here.
And Mayor Weldon.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Are there any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, the agenda is approved. Are there any changes to the minutes for January 24th? I see shakes of head no, so we will consider the minutes approved. With that, will bring us to agenda topics. The first one will be the 1% sales tax projects. Remember, for this one, our goal today is just to agree on some kind of process. We will not be picking projects today. Mr. Watt, I'm assuming that's going to you.
Yes, Mayor, you've got a memo in the packet. I also included everything that we had on the Saturday, March 12th work session and the last two times that we've extended the 1% sales tax, so you can see what we've done in the past. We don't have a lot of time to do work on this topic. In order to meet the regular schedule for placing something on the ballot, we need to introduce an ordinance by July 11th, which means our work on this is going to be in May and June. And I think we're either going to try and fit this into, I'm going to suggest that the COW is the right committee, the June 6th and 27th. I think 2 committee meetings probably would do it. But it could be a complicated process. It's you're likely to have all kinds of views on good projects for funding. You're likely to want to have a fair amount of time to discuss. And so I've just kind of queued this up to get you thinking. And at the bottom of the memo on packet page 15, there's 4 questions, and maybe we can just kind of walk through those questions. So the first one, does the Assembly feel the need to hear from departments and enterprise boards, or has the CIP and legislative priority list been sufficient process to date? So historically, different assemblies have done different things. I would say that this assembly has done a lot more work on legislative priority list for state funding and for congressional funding than prior assemblies. In any case, there'll be an ordinance, but by the time you adopt an ordinance on August 1st, and you get public testimony on August 1st, that's really going to be too late to influence the process. So I think at a minimum, there's probably going to be a period where people are encouraged to contact you with ideas and emails. But that's kind of the first question is how much process or what process do you think is going to be necessary so that you hear from departments, boards, and the public?
Okay, shall we pause you there and talk about that question? So what are people's thoughts? Right now, we're in the midst of the budget. We're in the middle of the budget, so we're hearing from a lot of entities as it is. Do we want to hear from more entities, or between our CIP lists and our legislative priorities and what different departments and enterprise boards are asking for, is that sufficient? Ms. Wall, I think I see your finger behind Mr. Smith.
It's flowing locks. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to add one thing, since I'm the Docks and Harbors liaison, that they've been working fairly diligently on some proposals for the 1%. So I noticed they were in this list, the manager's proposal at a certain amount, but just wanted to add that to the conversation, that I know they have something prepared.
All right, but I'm assuming that we could see a memo from them rather than have them present. She's nodding yes for the record. Ms. Hale, your thoughts?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Given that we have put a lot of work into this, and given that we're all getting a little meetinged out, and given that we have a superb city manager that can interpret these things for us and bring memos to us, I would prefer that we work with the list that we have, and we work with what the city manager can bring us and the different entities can provide us.
All right, thank you, Ms. Hale. I have Ms. Hughes Candies and Mr. Bryson and Ms. Treem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was just going to say, generally, I think because we have put a little bit more effort into getting feedback from different groups on the CIP, and we've done some public meetings regarding the legislative list, I am of what maybe is the consensus that memos, I certainly welcome more feedback, but I'm not sure process-wise we need to go through everybody. When I tried to consider who we might hear from, I think we're in pretty good, robust discussion with them already.
All right, thank you, Ms. Hughes Candy, Mr. Bryson, and then Ms. Treem.
I'm in concurrence with my colleagues here. I believe that we have looked at the legislative priority list and our CIP lists and our goals more times than we might in other years. So, I mean, why did we do all that work? We're on that track. Why not continue on that pace? So I'm in agreement.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bryson. Ms. Treem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I agree that we have kind of beat the legislative priority list to death at this point. And I think that we do get a lot of input from the enterprise boards, but I would be curious to hear from different departments about their needs, just because I don't think that those needs are necessarily brought to the assembly in the same way that other needs are from enterprise boards that present to us directly. And then of course the legislative priority lists, where all the big sexy projects that we want to do go. And the CIP process, I know that, departments are limited to what they can submit all of their requests, but of course they're limited by dollar amounts. So that's what we see is what's limited by those dollar amounts. So I'd be curious to hear if maybe there are some needs out there within CVJ that are just not as shiny and sexy and don't get our attention as much as maybe some other projects. So I would be interested to hear from departments on that, but I don't have strong opinions on the way that information is given to us.
Okay, so without going further, it sounds like there's at least 5 in consensus, so I don't think we have to talk to the other 3 of us because we probably agree. Mr. Watt, we're hearing that we don't need to hear too much, but I will pick up on Ms. Treem's request too. If there's anything from the department level, please let us know. And I'm assuming that works for you, Mr. Smith.
Yes, I've just never going through the 1% process before. I mean, does it get like the marine passenger fees? Is it traditional, or what is the traditional process in terms of asking the public or things of ideas they have? And then my other question would be, we would see, say we put Parks and Rec for 5 million, we would get some idea of what, at least the different projects that's expected to go to. Of course, things change, but could you answer those 2 questions, please?
Mr. Watt.
Mayor, thank you. I think my intent would be to reach out to the enterprise board directors. So I know Docs and Harbors is thinking about it. They will find you. They're aware. Nobody misses the opportunity when the sales tax comes around. It's not a well-kept secret. We'll also check in with the departments for more specificity. So on the March 12th list on packet page 49, I truly was just plugging things like 5 million here and 5 million there, just knowing that some number and some level of projects would get pitched. So we can work with the departments on that. Generally, I would say all the departments, they will all be happy and supportive of as much money as we put in deferred building maintenance and technology. Those 2 things, all the departments wish we had more of both of those. But Assembly Member Treem's comment, I think, is good. The departments are, they're close to the ground and they know what their user groups are interested in. So we can do a little mini process. Sort of what I'm thinking is maybe we do a little kind of process where we canvass the boards and the departments and we give the assembly members some time to add things to the list, and we kind of create a composite list that maybe grows, and then later you rank that list.
Okay, we're bleeding into the other question. So I think we pretty much answered the first one. The second one we've touched on. So does anybody have a problem using the list on page 49 as a starting point? And obviously you've heard that the departments and the enterprise boards and even the public will probably reach out to us to put stuff on it. So we'll end up with a pretty big list. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't, but, and I think I'm just reiterating, it sounds like that is what Mr. Watt is suggesting. But in terms of the departments, I just want to echo, I think that's really important because we're never going to ask the legislature for certain operational costs. So that's just sort of a like aha moment that I really want us to be aware of, but it sounds like Mr. Watt's on it.
Yep, and typically this 1% is typically used for CIP or deferred maintenance as in the past, but doesn't have to be, but that's typically. Any other comment on that second question? Is that an okay to start with that list? I saw a couple thumbs up, but hearing nothing against it, we'll move on to the third question. This assembly seems to like ranked choice voting. So is that what we want to do, or does someone have an idea of a different level? And I don't know if you want to speak to that, Mr. Watt, or.
Thank you, Mayor. So in the past, we've done things like, given the assembly a list of 20 or 30 projects, and the assembly's been able to, assign an order and a dollar amount. And then we try to, make that into one list. And then the assemblies have worked down the list to sort of confirm funding levels in the order of priority. Something like that probably makes sense. You probably need some individual time, and then we need some type of composite list, and then you're going to need to work through that final list to make sure it really makes sense. But I don't have a set in stone method on that.
Okay. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a hypothetical question that sounds like a reasonable approach as well. in the past, has there been ever a situation where someone says, hey, I think this department needs this much money for, like kind of someone chucks something at a list that didn't come organically through our process? It like adds to a list where it didn't come from our legislative priorities or anything in memory or?
Mayor, I'm sure we've had some projects gain a lot of momentum late. And
I'm not
the
suggesting that's
chances- their
good process.
chances of
I just,
success have just skyrocketed right at the end. And I mean, that's just the process.
Okay.
People are going to be persuasive and they're going to see the deadlines and they're going to work you.
sure. Okay.
That's just how it works.
Okay.
So ranked choice, I don't see anybody saying no, like we've done in the past for the priority list. Yep, this is kind of just like the pending list on steroids. So anyway, okay, that brings us to 3. We're moving right along, folks. Good. The next question is, I'm assuming that we'll want to keep this topic in the cows rather than the finance, and Lord help us if we have to have special meetings on it. Ms. Hughes Candies, you're talkative tonight.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I am talkative tonight. The only thing that I humbly would request is I think the cows are a good place to keep it. If we can keep those other agenda items light so that if it turns into robust discussion, that we don't have to keep it moving as fast.
And that makes sense. And if it becomes robust and we're running out of time, we certainly can have a special assembly. I just don't want to have a whole bunch just on this topic alone. Mr. Bryson. Oh, sorry, Ms. Trim, I just saw your hand. Apologize.
Madam Mayor, I want to go along this process. I agree with what we're doing. I think we're moving the right track. However, from the field trips that I took earlier last year in the fall, there were two covers that we could build that would lower our long-term fleet costs. All of our road maintenance vehicles are stored out in the open without just a roof.
Mr. Bryson, you're already talking about the list. We're not doing that.
Oh, that's
today.
okay. So here's my question. All right. So here's my question.
Question is, can we keep this in the committee of the whole?
So the question I had is, if I came across something like that as I'm out in the city and I'm discovering, oh man, if we had this could be a benefit to the city and it could help save money. Would that just be part of the discussion in the cow in the future? Is that, I think, what my question
Yes, that
is?
would be correct.
Okay.
And remember, there's a set limit of money and you need to listen to your departments on what they think are the priority. Just saying that out there. Ms. Green.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I guess I have a question about the timeline. So if the ordinance must be introduced by July 11th, okay, introduced by July 11th, we do have, I think I just answered my own question, actually. Never mind. I don't have a question anymore.
Yeah, so just for the public, it must be introduced by July 11th and we have to adopt it if we're going to adopt it by August 1st. So put that out there. Mr. Smith.
Thanks. I probably didn't ask it clearly the first time, so I'm going to try again. Is it tradition for us to put any type of public information soliciting questions from the public or not? Sorry.
Mr. Watt, but I think the public is aware of this, but you may answer too.
Thank you, Mayor. No, it's not tradition to put out something. I think the public is aware, the boards are aware. So what I would suggest is at the May 16th assembly meeting, I'll provide a staff report and I'll kind of lay out a little more detail on timeline. And in there will be, get your project nominations into the manager's office probably a week before the cow on June 6th. And then on June 6th, we'll probably try to do two things. We'll probably try to confirm that we've got everything on the list that belongs on the list. And we'll probably try to make sure that everybody understands what's on the list. And maybe that's a good goal for the 6th. And then maybe your voting takes place between your individual voting between the 6th and the 27th. And then when you meet on the 27th, you're confirming those final numbers. And then the last thing I would point out, Mr. Bryson, the thing you were talking about is actually on the list on packet page 49.
Perfect. All right. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Madam Mayor, I'm going for a record. Can I request, or do we think it's feasible? I'm sure the boards and the departments are well aware, and it's not a secret. Can whoever is doing the interim public officer job put out just a quick thing saying we're doing this now? If you've got thoughts, just email your assembly.
That's a great idea, Mr. Manager. Make it so.
We will find the person doing those interim duties.
Yes. All right, anything further? Okay, Ms. Glasshefsky, I haven't seen your hand raised, so I'm assuming you're fine with the discussion.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Totally excellent. Keep going.
Okay, so yes, ma'am. Okay, so now we're going to item B, sales tax on food. Mr. Rogers, are you starting this?
Mayor Weldon, I could start it if you'd like. I apologize that the packet items are a little bit probably not in the preferable order, but page 62 of the packet is a memo where I've tried to gather a bunch of thoughts together and also give you a bit of an unfiltered staff recommendation just based on history and where it seems like you are now. There are a number of other things in the packet that I'll just point out. You asked for other sales tax caps in Alaska, so there's a complete list of those, at least of the members of the Alaska Remote Sellers Sales Tax Commission. There's a few jurisdictions that aren't members, but you're seeing the full breadth of what happens in Alaska. There is a little news article about statewide sales tax caps from Avalara. Avalara is a sales tax service provider, so they actually have good information about that that's consolidated. A breakdown of where we see by industry the application of the single service and the single item caps. I know that that's, I think you might love to have information on that subject that I don't have myself, or that I couldn't give you if I did. But I tried to give you a breakdown of where those exemptions are claimed by industry. And then there's a couple of documents in there that are from a couple of years, 2.5 years ago, that when we were floating this idea then, which was my best effort to calculate how sales taxes would shift. So even though we talk about, at the time, we were talking about exempting food and contemplating a seasonal sales tax rate of 5% and 6% in the summer. And the question at the time was, well, how do we know people are actually going to save money? And I did my darndest to really put numbers to that and let you track the math as much as you are inclined to. And what we got down to was that the average household sales tax savings in any given year would be $143. Admittedly, that's not a lot of money, but when you think about trying to reduce the tax burden on the public and take in about the same amount of revenue, $143 isn't nothing. So we've included all of those as backup for the memo. I think that the project in front of the assembly or the cow tonight is probably to think about whether you want further discussion on modification of exemptions, specifically as it relates to the exemption of sales tax on food. My memo encourages you not to do anything with exemptions. I think it's always worth continuing the discussion about exemptions. I'm not necessarily sure it's in your best interest to tie that inextricably to the discussion about repealing sales tax on food. So my encouragement to you is to think about just separating that. And obviously, in this committee or in the finance committee at any time, we can review and re-review current exemptions that are in place for policy considerations, and not necessarily have it be about the revenue that we would use to offset the exemption of food. And then separately in the memo on page 62, there was a request for just a sort of a scatter of what the revenue impacts would be of sales taxes at various rates, both year-round and seasonal. You'll see that on the lower right-hand corner of the first page of that memo. I can walk through that if there's any interest. I think that's it from me, Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Okay, before we go any further, let's deal with questions before we deal with statements first. Questions, Ms. Gladysevsky, do you have a question?
Sure, I'll have a question because apologize, I'm on iPad and my phone. I'm poking around to try the right document. What was and I'm not sure it's there. What was the revenue gain if we removed the exemption for sales by nonprofits? My memory is at 1.3 million. Is that correct, Mr.?
Assemblymember Gladysevsky and Mayor Weldon, it's complicated. So we did look at this. We looked at 2021 data. We've mostly been looking at 2019 data, but for this question, we looked at more current data. We see $27 million of sales exempted in the category of sales by nonprofits. However, of that amount, at least 16 million is in the category of senior and disability services or healthcare and housing. We estimate that at least $12 million of that will remain exempt as either healthcare or assisted living services, which are both exempt under state law. This is really difficult to tell because every one of these nonprofits that loses an exemption, if that's what happens, is going to try and find themselves into another exemption if it's allowable, and many of them will. There's a mathematical mistake here that I realized when I was looking at this packet before we came in, which is that I said that repealing the exemption for sales by nonprofits on the remaining 11 million would generate $550,000. That $11 million is actually maybe not the right number. It maybe should be 15, just subtracting what we think is at least $12 million of exempt sales from 27 million total. So maybe there's $15 million of sales that could be made taxable that would generate somewhere in the neighborhood of $600,000 to $700,000 a year of additional sales tax. I think that that's probably a pretty good place to put you. So back to Assemblymember Gladysevsky's direct question, $27 million of sales generates $1.4 million of sales tax today. Probably about half of that is going to remain exempt. So 700,000-ish is in the range of what could be made taxable.
Thank you for that last statement. That made it pretty clear to me. Ms. Gladysevsky, do you have a follow-up?
Nope, I just, I see why it went down because we were assuming 27 million, not whatever it would be.
Yeah. Okay, questions, Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On the table you provided of Alaska jurisdiction, single item sales tax caps, packet page 56. You have a number of questions that you're asking of each municipality. Is there a sales tax cap on a single item? I understand what that is. Juneau has one. Is there a sales tax cap on a single service? I understand what that is. Juneau has one. Is there a sales tax cap on a transaction? We don't have that. What is that?
Mr. Rogers.
Right. So Mayor Weldon, the way that this works is that CBJ's code applies the sales tax cap at the individual item or service level, meaning that we don't ever look at the total of a receipt, the total of an invoice, the total of a transaction. That's under CBJ code. That's irrelevant. The only thing that's relevant is the value of the single item or the single service. For the most part with items, there's never really a lot of debate about that. We understand what an item is. The sales tax office routinely counsels service providers about what a single service is. There's some interpretive memo that go very specifically with that. The language we use is that it is the service integrated to a whole. You can't paint a house and then say, well, I painted this part of the house and I painted this part of the house. I painted whatever. So like painting a house is a single service, right? And that gets tricky, that gets tricky with construction projects and mechanical projects. It's not always straightforward, but we counsel vendors all the time about how to correctly apply the single service and the single item cap. Single item cap, quite straightforward. Single service, a little more difficult. But the key thing here with regard to the list is that we do not have a cap on a transaction, meaning a receipt, an invoice, and anything like that.
Good, Ms. Wall. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so I think ultimately this goes down to his last sentence in our recommendation. We need to figure out if the public supports exempting food from sales tax and replacing that lost revenue. So now comments. You guys are a quiet group. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess looking at this, I see the pathway that I like forward, which I think would be putting it to the voters, removing sales tax on food and offering keeping the 5% the same during the winter months and having a seasonal increase to 6% that has an estimated revenue loss to 400,000. That's really close. They're nice flat numbers. And I think I like the idea of taking it to the voters too, to see if they see that as the right way to prioritize things. So.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Blaszewski.
I just want to make sure I understand this table before, so I do have one more question. So this assumes on the bottom of, I don't know what page it is, but the little table with the 5 summer and winter numbers.
Page 62.
Okay, page 62. These assume that we take sales tax off of food. Is that correct? So Yep.
Thank you.
It doesn't make sense otherwise. Is that correct?
Thank you, Ms. Glaszewski. I had similar questions earlier today. Mr. Rogers, you want to explain your table a little bit?
Let me just
Mayor
say,
Weller.
it says 5% for winter and 6% for summer is a loss of 400,000. So that doesn't make any sense unless you're assuming food is off. So is that how the table reads?
That is correct.
Okay, great. I appreciate that because I didn't get the math until that. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I almost fell off my chair. None of your, but you can't tell.
Do you have anything further, Ms. Glaszewski, before I go to Mr. Bryson?
Yes, I still would like to do the sales tax by a nonprofit issue. These are nonprofits. Many of these nonprofits are selling items that other tourist stores sell. The tax is paid by the people that buy the thing. It's not a cost to the nonprofit. It is a cost to the people buying. And if you're buying a pair of earrings from Juneau Arts and Humanities Council, you're paying the same tax you would pay if you bought it from a tourist store. And that seems fair to me. So I would like to do that. It also raises 700,000 in revenue, which would help offset some of this. So I'm still hoping we could do that.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Glaszewski. And Mr. Attorney had a side issue today that he had to deal with because we were trying to get that to a red folder item, but it just didn't make it tonight. So we will see the sales tax by nonprofits later. So Mr. Bryson and then Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I must admit that I've been hesitant to increase sales tax during the summer months. That while a lot of our business community does depend on summer tourism, that there are other businesses that Juneau citizens are their primary customers that would be impacted by seasonal sales tax changes. So I would like to get the business community's input at the very least to have some of the unintended consequences of raising the sales tax on the off or during the summer season. Would that impact the furniture store negatively, or the car store negatively, or the bike shop negatively? if we had more answer on that, it would make it easier for us to decide yay or nay on a 6% summer sales tax. Because as I'm listening and as I've gone through this longer and listened to and try to figure this problem out from somebody who was against, I've started this conversation completely against an increase in sales tax in the summer. But now as we've gone through it more, the benefit of not charging sales tax to our citizens on food is at a greater benefit than some of the offsets by, this will have a negative impact. If we can minimize that or figure out what that is first, it'd make the decision easier. Thank you for the time, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. And I believe the chamber did write us a letter, but it was pretty close to the meeting time that it came across. Ms. Hughes Candies, did you have your hand up?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I did. I guess not why I raised my hands, but could you elaborate what you meant, or could Mr. Palmer elaborate what you're talking about with the red folder item? I didn't understand that.
So we were going to try and bring forth the removing the sales tax exemption on sales by nonprofits, but we didn't get a chance to get it to us tonight.
Okay.
We've talked about it several times, but we just didn't get a chance to talk about it again tonight, but that's all right.
Okay.
Talk about it again soon.
Okay. Thank you.
Correct me if I'm wrong, and can I ask a question?
Sure, please.
I'm not sure if it's Mr. Watt or Mr. Palmer. Whatever we decide tonight, if we decide to send it to the voters, we're going to see it again to see the language, right? So this would not be the last time. Okay, that was my question. I'm
Yes,
getting
I'm
nods.
shaking my head. Yes, you'll see it at least twice,
Okay,
maybe more.
okay, that's what I was looking for. Ms. Hale.
I think
Oh, wait, sorry. I cut Ms. Hughes Candies off to ask my question.
I did have more to say, but also it's okay. Okay, so I'll add my comments. And I like Mr. Palmer's phrase of shaking his head, yes, which is confusing to me. So I appreciate Mr. Rogers' memos very much. I will start by saying that Ms. Gladaszewski says she's not done with looking at tinkering with some of our other exemptions. I would say for my own opinion that I would like to look at some of these other exemptions, but at a later date in our normal process after the budget, after everything. You know, they deserve our investigation and possible tinker with if we want to as a body. And I would be interested in that, but not as part of this process with the food. So in that vein, I do agree with Mr. Smith. I think it is correct to take it to the voters. I do also like the 5% in the winter and the 6% in the summer. I think that is out of this chart, the best one. To Mr. Bryson's concern, I am sensitive to that as well, but I personally would feel like that was greater discussion with the business community might be more warranted if we were looking at a situation like 0% and 9%. As somebody who lives in Juneau and purchases services that are and goods from businesses that are targeted to residents and not to tourists, my decision to purchase something is not going to be influenced by 1% difference in the sales tax. So yeah, I think I really appreciate this table and all the materials you provided. And I'd like to send the 5% in the winter, 6% to the summer to the voters.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes Candies. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And just for clarification, I know I asked this question when we talked about this the last time. If we increase or if we change the sales tax amount, that must go before the voters. If we change exemptions, that does not have to go to the voters. Thank you. I'm seeing nods.
That is correct. Ms. Gladaszewski, your hand pops up and then it lowers and then pops up. So right now it's up. Did you have something?
I did. I meant to turn it down and then I put it back up. Madam Mayor, I just wanted to make sure that I too agree with the voters 5 and 6%, and all those conversations, to Mr. Bryson's point, are going to happen in the next, if we put it on the ballot, it's going to be a conversation for the next, however many months it is until voting day. But I would like an ordinance written in such a way that it is contingent. Mr. Palmer has to put on his lawyer hat. I guess he never takes it off, but that it's contingent on, the removing sales tax on food is contingent on this passing or some version of that. If Mr. Palmer could comment and.
Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Ms. Kladaszewski. I got it. And my sense based on tonight's conversation is either Mr. Rogers and I will be coming back probably to the COW or Finance Committee with an ordinance or two that present both these options. One for the exempting food if the voters approve a summer seasonal rate of 6%, and then another ordinance repealing the sales by nonprofits.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Palmer.
Mr. Palmer.
Okay, anything further before I comment? Okay, I'll comment. I probably view this differently than most people on the assembly. Mr. Rogers put it out, that's $143 savings per household. So I don't see it as a huge savings, but for food and most of those folks that we're trying to help probably are getting help elsewhere with SNAP and those kind of things. But I guess we won't know what everybody else's viewpoint is until we set it to the voters. So I guess we have to set it to the voters. I am concerned, Mr. Bryson touched on it. There's a lot of businesses in town that their summer months, just because we're more active as a community, it has nothing to do with the visitors that come into town, buy a lot of stuff. That's when you do your gardening projects, your little build your shed projects, all those kind of things. So you're going to be paying a little bit more tax, but that's just my opinion, and I think the voters will weigh in one way or the other. So, Mr. Smith, I'm gonna look for you for a motion.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would move that staff draft an ordinance removing sales tax on food contingent upon a vote of an increase to the summer sales tax to 6%.
Do you need anything more, Mr. Palmer?
And ask for unanimous consent.
Any objections? Seeing none, that motion is passed. We'll discuss it in more detail later. With that, we'll just keep going along to election code changes. Am I going to Madam Clerk or Mr. Watt for that? They're
Thank
pointing the
you.
fingers at Madam Clerk, so Madam Clerk's got it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and my apologies to the Assembly and to Mr. Rogers for the state of the packet with all the sales tax items being out of order. I thought this is one of those fun novice things that you think it's doing what you think it's doing, and then it doesn't. So I will bring your attention to the memo that you find in the packet on page 64, I believe it is. And this is kind of what you might consider the executive summary of all the 30-some pages worth of election code changes. And I'm happy to answer any questions or go into any details. But primarily, this is election code cleanup language to move us into having our new ballot processing center. We're tailoring the language such that we can allow for vote centers rather than polling precincts, as well as also identifying some of the issues that have come up over the last 2 years, and some of those code changes are to address some of those issues. Protecting voters' personal information was a key piece of that. We had a number of petition books that went out last year that never came back. And every single one of those persons who signed a petition indicated a personal identifying information. And to have that out there in the public realm and not returned to the city is a grave concern of mine. Because I think that the voters in their opinion when they're signing a petition book is that this is going to be in the custody of the city. So this is one of the key changes to the election code that I requested the law department to implement in this ordinance. Whenever somebody signs a petition book that can be considered public information, and we would have to provide that information under a request for public records, but we would redact the personal identifying information of that voter. So part of the language was to reduce the number of identifying numbers, digits. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. The digits of the personal identifiers. We, when we're looking up a voter's information, can see, okay, so this is the last 4 digits of your driver's license versus your social security number, or whatever the case might be. We have at our disposal the confidential information, but should we have to provide information, we want to make sure that that's not disclosable to the public. And we want to protect our voters' personal identifying information. Another way that we've asked the law department to make changes to the code was to codify some of the procedures that we're already doing in the election code. I have a binder here with a very full binder with all the policies and procedures and all the forms and all the information that we use to actually conduct the election. Some of that is dictated by what the code language is, and some of it is just our policies that we implement, the procedures, and we have to land on what those are 10 days prior to election day. And so we've taken the last couple of years where we've worked with the municipality of Anchorage, used their forms, used their processes. This language code changes is implementing and codifying some of those practices and those procedures that we've implemented in our policy book. 2 other key pieces: the return of elections results and certification by the Canvas Review Board. Currently, our code says that we will do that on the 2nd Tuesday after Election Day. This year, it happens to fall on the Alaska Day holiday. It'd be nice if we didn't have to work on the holiday. We will if we have to, but this language change recommends that we might change that such that the elections returns can be done on the Wednesday if the holiday falls on a Tuesday. And lastly, the implementation of new language with respect to observers. In the past, we have had polling places. We've used the state of Alaska polling place handbook, and we followed the same protocols that the State Division of Elections has in the past when we had in-person polling elections. For the last 2 years, when we were working with the municipality of Anchorage, we used their observers handbook. And so now that we're having a new ballot processing center for the city and borough of Juneau locally, we're needing to care for the security of the area that the new ballot processing center is. And so this is codifying some of those practices that we actually have practiced over the last 2 years. So those are the key changes. There are some minor verbiage changes and timing changes that you might see in the code, but they're more housekeeping than anything. And I'm happy to answer any questions that any of the assembly members might have.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Who has questions? Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for all of this overview and putting together all these changes. I noticed quite a few additions and changes related to absentee voting. Was wondering if you could provide kind of an overview of what those changes, the context for those changes.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the in-person absentee voting process, you could do absentee by mail. You could do absentee by fax/electronic transmission. You can do absentee in person at a early vote center, kind of what the state calls early voting, but we don't have the same process that the state does. So we call it absentee in person. And then trying to think if I'm missing one of them. For the by mail elections, you're already doing absentee by mail. Instead of, say, you're traveling and you're going to be at a different location, you're going to be at your parents' house in a state somewhere else. on a temporary basis. So the codification is to call this application for your by mail ballot to be sent to a temporary address. So that's kind of the main reason for those code changes in the absentee language.
Any follow-up, Ms. Wall? Who else has questions? Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think they might be cleaned up, but I just want to check just anytime we're changing things regarding voting procedure. So on page 11 of the ordinance, could you just maybe help me walk through that and show me if there's any, I'm just trying to see if there's anything that significantly being changed. But again, just the heading of the section, maybe want to just hear a little more from you if you don't mind.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Mr. Smith. This is the process that we have gone through the last 2 years when we've conducted vote by mail elections. And this is actually within not only the vote by mail election section, but it's changing the wording for if we were to do an in-person polling place precinct, because now we have secure ballot drop boxes that are now available 24/7. We have to send out a team of 2 persons to go and collect the ballots from those on a daily basis. They also go and collect them from our, what we're calling our vote centers, what we used to refer to as our early voting absentee in-person centers. Those teams of 2 people go and collect those ballots on a daily basis so that they can then be returned and kept in a secure location and all of that. So this language is to enable that to occur and sets out the process by which security seals and all of the security protocols are implemented in that process.
Follow up, Mr. Smith?
And chain of custody. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that as well.
That's good. So sorry, is the ballot box is that the, when it's referring to the ballot box, is that, wait, that's not the drop center.
There are 2 different kinds of ballot boxes. One are the secure ballot boxes that are located outside, that we actually have a locking mechanism that will unlock the ballot feed location on the 15th day prior to election day, and that'll stay unlocked until 8 o'clock on election night. We have collection of those ballots. So that's one of the ballot boxes this is referring to. It's also referring to the ballot boxes that are being collected on a daily basis from the vote centers.
Good, Mr. Smith? You're the only one. Go ahead.
There's a reference to electronic ballots in there, just to confirm that is just for like accessibility or ADA. Is that the only type of electronic ballot? Is that what the electronic ballots is referring to, like the touch screen voting?
Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Smith, that is correct. That is the touch screen. I mean, anyone, you don't have to be an ADA person to use that. It's done on a tablet and it's a print on demand ballot. And you vote your ballot, it can read it to you audibly. You can have it zoom in a really big screen if you need to visually, but it allows for a voter to not be assisted by another individual to be able to vote their ballot. The ballot itself, when it comes out, is printed at the polling place. They're issued the same type of envelope that any other voter is issued, and it is processed in the same way as all the other ballots. But yes, that is exactly what it's referring to. Think of the tablet as a great big electronic pen.
Okay. Ms. Hale?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a question about the personal identifier issue that you were raising. You were talking about your discomfort with petition books not being returned in the past, and that means that there's petition books out there with personal information. If petition books are returned, can they be FOIA'd? Can those petition books with the names be requested by Freedom of Information Act requests?
Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, Ms. Hale, they can be. They would be redacted such that their personal identifier that they place on that petition book would be redacted. But yes, that is part of our public records, and it would be subject to the Public Records Act.
Thank you.
Follow up, Ms. Hale.
Yeah, may I make a follow-up statement to that?
Sure.
Madam Mayor. I know that, I'm not sure how familiar people are with the Recall Dunleavy campaign, but at a certain point, bot was actually created that published names on Twitter of people who had signed that campaign. And I believe that was shut down fairly quickly by Twitter because it's illegal, or it's against Twitter policy to actually use a bot and to do that. And I guess my concern would be that, and so there was a lot of concern in that recall campaign, a lot of concern for retaliation, and actually retaliation did occur. Some people were removed from positions, for example, who had been involved in that campaign. And so I guess that would be my concern, is that if we require petition books to be returned, and somebody running a petition might stop it midway through because of reaction to it. I guess I'm just expressing concern about that possibility, given what happened with the Recall Dunleavy campaign.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hale. I think, well, they have to be returned if they want to put the initiative of the ballot anyway. But if they don't gather enough signatures, I suppose they don't have to be returned. So that would be my
So-
question on top of Ms. Hale's question.
I will bring your attention to page, there is a proposal in the language that, and let me find out which page this is on. Page 32 of the ordinance, which is on packet page 97. This does add language to the initiative process that says all petition booklets shall be surrendered to the election official within 60 days of issuance of the petition booklets to the petitioners committee, regardless if a sufficient number of signatures are collected or not by the petition committee. This is to address the situation that came up last year. And I would defer to Mr. Palmer on any of the legal ramifications of that. I just know that if I were a voter signing a petition, I wouldn't necessarily want my personal information sitting on somebody's household shelf.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Palmer, do you want to speak to that? Did that answer your question, Ms. Hale?
It did, and I have just a follow-up question.
Go ahead.
related to that. So what we're trying to do tonight is actually forward an ordinance for introduction. And that does not mean that if we want to change, if we wanted to remove this language at the assembly, we could actually do that. Is that correct, Mr. Palmer?
Mr. Palmer.
I knew this was going to come up sometime tonight, so here we go. So this gets to this core question, and I think we need to talk about powers of committees, and the cow being the most important one to address. So if the motion is simply a recommendation for introduction, then there is a way to read that motion as allowing the assembly to make amendments that are different than what the cow said. If the motion that goes up is to introduce, so not a recommendation, then that's different.
Could you repeat that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes,
So-
can you repeat that, Mr. Attorney?
Is the committee's motion, is it going to be a recommendation to do something, or is it a decision to do something?
Okay. Looks like we're going to probably recommend things from here on out. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Palmer, I am assuming and hoping that I'm right, this is tied to the parking amendment thing we just had and figuring out our powers, just making sure I'm on the right page here. My understanding of that, without getting into the weeds, is that we were in unusual territory because it was the exact same thing. Am I wrong to think that if we made a motion to introduce something, nothing prevents us from going hog wild with amendments at the assembly, because if it does, I've certainly witnessed that happen in the past.
Ms. Hughes Candies, thank you for the question, although we're straying off topic again. But Mr. Palmer, would you answer that? And that was a special circumstance, and please explain why that was.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Hughes Candy. So the circumstance you're referring to is the parking discussion we had last Monday night. And you are correct. The issue that was unique in that circumstance was the Assembly had introduced an ordinance, had discussed it actually at public hearing at Assembly, and then a member made an amendment, and the Assembly decided not to fully flush out that amendment at the public hearing, referred it to the COW. COW then made the changes and then brought back a version B of the ordinance to the Assembly. And then another member was going to make a motion to amend that back to version A. And so it's that fact pattern that's a little unique. That doesn't happen very often.
Right.
And so if the Assembly bring it back tonight to the election ordinance, I don't have any specific number, but let's say 30, 40, 50 amendments in this election ordinance that's before the COW tonight. If the committee makes a recommendation to introduce this at the end of this meeting, and it goes to the Assembly, and in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever time it takes to get to public hearing, if the Assembly wants to make amendments at a public hearing, I don't see anything wrong with that, because none of those amendments have been specifically or thoroughly discussed at a COW.
Correct. Or sorry, of course, not correct. I'm not saying you're correct. I'm saying, I'm asking you the questions. So that is what I thought. However, so you're saying the thing I'm getting confused about, and I'm not trying to bring up the other issue, but it sounded to me like you said, we're saying at the time of the other unique fact pattern thing that happened, it sounded like we could get into a whole conversation about this. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. But now, based on the way you said it before I asked this convoluted question, it almost sounded like you'd reached some decision on your own, or you'd had some conversation with members that I wasn't privy to, and we had decided one way or another. So that's why, that was my concern, that we'd made some decision.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes Candies. Mr. Palmer.
I will do my best to unravel this one. So I have not had any detailed conversations with other members. The dilemma that faces us in general is the question that mostly the clerk and I struggle with, is how much power does the COW have? And then more generally, how much power do the other committees have? And so let me just give you the examples as to why this is challenging for us. When a committee discusses something prior to introduction, no problem. Committees can make changes, no issue with that at all. But it's the special scenario where the Assembly has an ordinance introduced, something is then referred to a committee, and then it comes, and the Assembly has it then set for public hearing, but the committee holds it. Does that committee actually have the power to do that? Or does it have to go up for public hearing at the Assembly? That's the struggle that we occasionally have, and it kind of got illustrated with the parking ordinance last Monday, is how much power does the committee of the whole have to make changes? And so it's that type of tension that we struggle with. I don't think we need to go into it much more tonight, but just to identify, that's where the clerk and I struggle a little bit 2, 3, 4 times a year, trying to balance that nuance and get a read of the body. Hopefully that's enough to get us through this tonight.
Well, hopefully through all that lawyer speak, typically when we move stuff from the committee of the whole to the Assembly, we can make changes at the Assembly. Typically. I'm asking you, Mr. Attorney.
I didn't know if that was a question or a comment.
Because we've done it in the past. As Ms. Hughes Candy said, yeah, I see questions all over the place now.
It's no problem if it's before introduction. We get into the problem if it's between introduction and public hearing.
All right, thank you. All right, with that, we'll go to Ms. Gladys and then Ms. Treem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I actually wanted, before we got onto this thing, was talk about election booklets. But just briefly on this issue, I think we must make it clear in our rules. And if we're not clear, we should make it clear that we can make changes at the assembly. Why would we take public hearing? Why do we listen? Then we will just finish everything at the COW and then not listen to anything the public says. Anyway, that's a side note. I think we need to make sure that's clear. And if anyway, but this was about the election booklet issue. I'm actually concerned about requiring those booklets to go back to the clerk. If in some cases, these things are sensitive, people who do this work, if they didn't get enough signatures, rather than have it be subject to the Public Records Act, they kept it. It's no more insecure. They already have those. People, when they submit, when they collect signatures, they copy those to keep them, so that if there's some disputes later, they could say, oh yeah, we gave you page 73 or whatever. So that's typically done anyway. And so they already have a copy of your personal information. And the reason they might not choose to send it to the city is that once they send it to the city, people can look up those names and go after those people like they did, like some petitions of recent note. So yeah, I understand the city clerk's concern about that information. I don't think sending it back to the city actually prevents anything, other than it now would make people be able to see those booklets. Thanks, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Gladysevsky. Ms. Dream.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I missed whatever came up about elections that prompted the conversation about what we can do at the COW versus the assembly. And I don't want to continue that conversation anymore, but I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything really important that prompted that conversation.
The question was, we're going to move this out of committee tonight. And the question was, could we look at potentially moving that paragraph having to do with petition booklets? And so it got brought up that we had this discussion about another motion before, but this is our normal circumstance. Show any amendment that wants to be done at the assembly level can be done, it looks like. So any further questions on the election?
Well, I appreciate Ms. Hale for catching that concern. And I think it's a valid one, but I think that weighing confidentiality and privacy, I personally would rather err on getting those booklets back and making sure that information isn't lost track of and lost control of. So that's my thought on that particular issue.
All right, thank you, Ms. Treem. Any further comments before we go to a motion? Ms. Hale.
Madam Mayor, I have a motion if we're ready for a motion.
Certainly.
Thank
Go
you. I recommend that the COW forward Ordinance 2022-24 COW to the Assembly for introduction at the May 16th Assembly meeting. And I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just an objection for a comment. I just want to thank the clerk for her work to execute secure, accessible, and transparent elections. I talked to her about this probably more than any other topic, and she's very good, and I very much appreciate her work for it. Thank you. Objection.
Okay, any further objection? Seeing none, I also wanted to thank the clerk for all the things she does with her election, because she certainly tries to make it fair and equitable and get everybody a chance to vote. I'm just going to point out a couple little dates that we should be aware of. Some of you on this assembly, July 15th this is filing for the municipal and school board candidacy, and July 25th, the filing period closes. September 4th is the last day for residents to register to vote in this election, and September 13th ballot should be mailed out. So we'll start with that. And as we get further down the road, we'll remind other people of dates as we get about when those ballots need to come back in. So move on or take a little break. Okay.
There was a motion and Mr. Smith removed his.
Okay,
objection.
any
I don't
obje-
hear a vote on the
Yeah,
motion.
any objection to Ms. Hale's motion? Sorry, seeing none. I thought I said that, but apparently I didn't. That motion passes. Okay, it is 7:10. We'll come back at 7:20. We'll bring the committee of the whole back to order. First, we'll go with item D, the street vendor map. Who is talking about this? Mr. Barr.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This ordinance is largely housekeeping. You'll recall that we discussed this as a companion ordinance to the actual parking ordinance that you decided on last Monday. This one updates the ordinance with better language. We no longer have a PD1 and PD2, so it replaces that language with vendor area 1 and vendor area 2. The maps themselves have not changed. They are the same as the old pre-amended maps. So there are no impacts to currently existing vendors. Do you have any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Barr? Seeing none, we'll bring it to the assembly. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that the assembly, that the committee of the whole recommend ordinance 2020-11B be introduced for public, be introduced and then public
Actually,
hearing.
you can just move it to the full assembly. And then-
Move it to the full assembly.
That's
Sorry.
Anything else, Mr. Palmer, on that one? Okay, perfect. So we're moving it to the full assembly. Any objections? Seeing none, that motion is passed. All right, that brings us to item E, JPD CCFR armed vehicle. Who's going to start this discussion? And gentlemen, if you would come up, we made a bigger table for you.
Mayor, we've got Deputy Chief Campbell, Lieutenant Campbell, and Assistant Chief Mead from the police and fire departments to talk about this issue, and I believe Deputy Chief is going to take the lead on the presentation.
All right, gentlemen. Deputy Chief Campbell, it's yours, and I believe, Madam Clerk, we have a PowerPoint. You have to hit the button so it's green. There you go.
Great, thank you. I just want to say thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, for us, the opportunity to come speak about this issue. There's obviously some community concern out there that, quite frankly, I overlooked when we were first going through this. And I'm pleased to be here today. I love talking about the police department so that we can just kind of set the record straight on what is it that we're recommending for the city to purchase. This is going to be a pretty short presentation. I think you might have already gotten the slides in your packet. There's only 7 of them, so it's going to go pretty quick. And it's also a very high level overview. We're not getting too in the weeds about historical things that have happened. If you want us to talk about specifics, we can, but this is a really high level overview about the history of Juneau and why we think this is going to be a necessary piece of equipment for us. So with that, we can just move to the next slide. So the question was posed last week of what is it? What are we proposing to purchase? And it is a Lenco Bearcat G3. That's the make, the manufacturer and the make. Lenco is a company out of Massachusetts, and it's a vehicle that was purposefully built for first responders. And we wanted that because it's not a repurposed military piece of equipment. It was designed for first responders. And all it really is, it's designed to safely transport people, both first responders and the public in general, in and out of dangerous situations. That's the whole purpose for it. It is a Ford F-550 pickup truck. And I think that's important to mention because most of our fleet are Ford vehicles. So our in-house JPD mechanic is a Ford certified mechanic. So any upkeep, maintenance, repairs, things like that, we have the ability for the base structure to handle that in-house as any other vehicle that the police department would own. And additionally, the armored rescue vehicle has no offensive capabilities whatsoever. It is purely just a shell of armor to transport both first responders and citizens in and out of dangerous areas. That's all it is. So that kind of brings us to, well, what does it look like? And that's the next slide. This is what the Bearcats look like. And this is a stock photo. This is not what the one that we're having built looks like. And the reason why it's a stock photo is because they're all purpose built depending on what the agency wants. There's a long list of features, and what ours looks like will be very similar to this, but this is not what our vehicle will look like. Some agencies, some EMS agencies on the East Coast, when they buy them, they paint them red for their department. The color is something that we'll be able to choose as well. But it's definitely a pickup truck that's been modified. I couldn't find a photograph of the back doors open, but it's just a big open cavity with a couple of bench seats on the side. When you read the literature, they talk about how the entry is very low, so that it makes it easier for people to get in and out of the back, as opposed to like a Humvee or something like that. So if it needs to be used for like the elderly or children, they can get in and out of the back very quickly and very easily without having to go over a big lip. And it's also wide enough to where you can put a gurney in the back if you have to use it for medical purposes. So that is what they look like. And the next slide is, well, what does it do? And for this question, I'm going to be turning it over to JV Lieutenant Craig Campbell and to Travis Mead, because they're the subject matter experts on the vehicle and how it would be used. So with that, I'll turn it over to Craig.
Thank you. Yes, the armored rescue vehicle, it can transport up to 12 uniformed officers or people at a time. So it's very spacious, allows for quite a few people to be inside. It's very unique as compared to a lot of our cars don't have as much space. So you can get quite a few people either moving in or out of a situation that's maybe high risk. The armored rescue vehicle can also safely deploy police and fire personnel into areas where maybe we have gunfire, maybe there's concerns of some type of explosives, but it really allows you just to protect because of its armor capabilities and its ballistics to protect the people that are inside at the time. Specifically, if you're going in to rescue people, you can park that vehicle in front of a known threat and you can safely work behind it. Additionally, the armored rescue vehicle can be used to evacuate people from dangerous areas, just like I said, without the fear of gunfire and being injured.
Hello. So I'm with the fire department, and one of my primary jobs with the department is special rescue. And that includes the extraction of injured people from the hazardous environments. And when I first saw this vehicle come across my desk, I was a fan of it. I think it's a great opportunity to provide something, to have a piece of equipment in town that we can utilize to go into a hazardous environment and extract people from harm's way and bring them back. And it also works with carrying people into a hazardous environment to perform a task. One of the features of this vehicle is it's a 4-wheel drive vehicle. So when we do have a natural disaster and we do have debris on the road, and that could be ice, it could be mud, you name it. This is a vehicle that's going to be able to kind of bash its way through this environment to gain access. As of just a few years ago, we had a landslide here in town. And although it wasn't as devastating as the one in Haines, it was still potential of what could come. And we were forced to have to take pieces of equipment up there that we could not access that area. Our ambulances some of them are 4-wheel drive, but it's not something that you want to put an ambulance into an environment like that. So I think that's a great aspect of it. It's armored. It's an armored rescue vehicle. It's a really tough, heavy duty armored ambulance is the way I look at this vehicle. It withstands high winds. We don't get the hurricane winds that you see in the East Coast, but we do get typhoons in Alaska. There has been issues with some vehicles in this town that have been turned over by winds. So there is that, there is that chance, but for the most part, it comes back to just being a really solid platform to go in and solid and safe platform to go in and do a job in a hazardous environment. Yeah. And I think if you go to the next slide. So this is to speak a little bit more on some of the disasters that we have seen or what we could see in the future. We live in Southeast Alaska. We get a lot of rain. You've seen it happen in Haines. I was personally on the ground in Haines and saw that, the devastation that can happen there. This may or may not work in that environment. It may be that we have to get heavy equipment in there to clear a roadway. And now we're working underneath a more hazard that may or may not come down on us. This is a similar situation in the event that we have an avalanche that we're working below. It may not be we want to put an ambulance, one of our first line ambulances into this environment, but a vehicle like this, it's built tough. If you're going to have a secondary slide, I want to be in this thing. I don't want to be in an ambulance. So again, I support it. And I think this is a great platform for us to have in our quiver to be able to pull from.
And then Craig, you want to take a couple of bullets also?
Yeah. So, I mean, I can kind of speak from experience. I've been a police officer for almost 20 years. I've had the say opportunity, but the chance to go through many police responses where we've had people that are shooting up neighborhoods, shooting at police, times where police officers are looking for people who are running around the community with guns, and it can be a very dangerous situation. I think this piece of equipment allows us to give the support and protection to those officers who we're going to ask them to put their lives in line. And I myself have been in there, and prior to this, we don't have the capabilities to actually keep our officers safe. It's a justified risk that we take with our current protection. But if we do get someone who wants to wish people harm, we don't have the capabilities to keep people safe. And I think this vehicle is something that, although I think we all hope that you never have to use it, I think the reality is we all probably have heard things just like living here. We've seen those situations where, hey, it did get pretty dangerous for those officers who are out there. So that's where I think I've definitely seen this vehicle as a need to it. I think we've wanted it for years, but there's definitely a high cost. And just now that we have that opportunity to get it.
So if I can just expand a little bit on what Travis and Craig said, in trying to answer the question is, well, why do we need this vehicle? You know, we can't predict what's going to happen in the future. The best prediction of future behavior is past behavior. So we looked at it and we decided, you know, there have been documented situations where we've had to rescue people due to natural disasters. We have had documented situations in the past where we had to insert police officers and first responders into situations where there's been active gunfire. We have had documented situations in the past where we've had to extract people from those same areas. We don't want to get into the weeds, but I was the incident commander in a situation where we were literally evacuating citizens from their homes in the dead of night through the back, where officers were carrying people through the woods in the dead of night to safety. And I don't think that we should think that that can't happen again. If we had the armored rescue vehicle, the first responders could have gone into the area, had the people enter the vehicle, and be done in a very, very short period of time, instead of having a protracted incident that took hours to safely evacuate people. So we have had a history of that in the past. We don't know when it's going to happen again in the future, but unfortunately it will. I think that every single person in this town could find themselves in a situation where they might need to be rescued either by a man-made event or a natural disaster. And I don't think it's hyperbole to say that every single person at some point in time might find themselves needing this vehicle. And it's the only tool that does the job, which is why we think that we need it. So then the next slide is, well, how will it be used? And the two agencies that would use it would be CCFR and would be the fire department. I mean, CCFR and the police department. CCFR would only use this rescue vehicle in situations where it would be inappropriate to use either an ambulance or a fire truck. And we would write our policies to reflect that. We are working on draft policies right now. Once the policy is done, it would be posted on the website, just like all our other policies, for transparency purposes. From the police perspective, we would only use the armored rescue vehicle if we had to insert first responders during a dangerous situation, extricate citizens during a dangerous situation, or if we had a situation like Lieutenant Campbell talked about, where it was a very, very dangerous person that we needed to contact with our SWAT team. based on 27 years of experience, I'm guessing maybe 3 or 4 times a year is when I could see us realistically using it. My hope is that it just sits in the back parking lot at the police department and it never gets used. But I'm a realist, and I don't think relying on hope is the way to address public safety concerns. And I think that with the grant funding we are finally able to secure for it, we can have this tool, and it's really the only tool of its kind. And I think that there's that old saying that, you know, if the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to view all problems as nails. And this is a specialty built tool that will enable us to really rescue people that are in need. And the last slide is questions. So myself, Lieutenant Campbell, and Assistant Chief Mead are available for any questions that you guys might have.
Thank you. First of all, Madam Clerk, could we get, there we go, our picture's back up. So again, we did well on the first part. Let's just deal with questions right now. Okay, who has questions? Ms. Treem and Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question actually might be maybe for Mr. Barr, and it's about the grant that's being used for this vehicle. I think we heard that it's a federal grant. Is it part of the 1033 program for giving police departments military vehicles, or is this a different kind of totally separate program from that?
Thank you, Ms. Treem. Mr. Barr.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This grant comes from the State Homeland Security Program. I do not believe that that is part of the program that Ms. Treem is referring to. I certainly haven't heard to it referred to as such, but that's my understanding that it is not part of that military relocation of military equipment program.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Barr. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question's for Mr. Mead. You talked about natural disaster situations. Well, you mentioned landslides and this vehicle being more appropriate than our ambulance or fire truck. Are there other vehicles that could operate in that environment that aren't armored vehicles?
That we have in our fleet?
I mean, that are out there.
Well, I sure. You know, I would say that there's 4-wheel drive ambulances that you could have specially built to do something similar. For me, this vehicle is more of a multi-purpose type vehicle. The key feature for me is this vehicle is armored. And so in the event that I have personnel that I have to travel either through a hot zone or into a hot zone, a hostile area, right, to work, I want to have the toughest vehicle that I have around my people while we go in there, perform work, extricate and remove them, right? I have ATVs out at the station right now that I could get on those and drag the little trailer across. And that's how we currently do a lot of trail rescues. It's not optimal. You're not going to do well if you're caught in a secondary slide while on an ATV. So yeah, there's probably all sorts of other vehicles that are out there that can be built for a unique situation, but for a multi-purpose, built vehicle, this is a good product.
Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, gentlemen, for coming. My thought as we were talking is if you would call it an armored ambulance, we might not even have this conversation. I think my main question is, who are we training to drive it, and what's the annual cost for maintenance, upkeep, and keeping people trained to drive this multi-use vehicle? Thank you.
Through the chair.
Campbell, you look like you're going to answer that one.
Yeah, through the chair. As mentioned earlier, the upgoing cost is going to be very similar to an F-550 pickup truck, which is what the base vehicle is built on. And we have a mechanic in-house that is a Ford certified mechanic that would be able to take care of like the brakes and the oil changes and things on that line. So I think that from a maintenance point of view, it makes sense to go with a Ford. From a training point of view, As Assistant Chief Meade pointed out, this is a multi-use vehicle, and it's intentionally so. It could be used by either us or the fire department. So it could be trained with either us or the fire department. I think that it would be fiscally more difficult to have multiple vehicles that get used less. We do train periodically with our partners. The Bearcat G3 is the armored vehicle used by the Alaska State Troopers. And we do have our personnel train with the Alaska State Troopers. And when you train in specialty teams, it's important that you use the same type of equipment. I'm not a SWAT guy, never have, and I like to talk, surprise, surprise. And I was a hostage negotiator for 10 years, and we used the same material called the rescue phone that the FBI used and the troopers used so that it would be interchangeable. So by having an armored rescue vehicle that matches what the troopers have, it would aid in our interagency training, because periodically we do send our staff up to Anchorage to train the troopers. The troopers can come down here and train with us. So I think that there are some very specific features that this has. A tremendous amount of thought and effort went into it. It's not just a knee-jerk reaction here. And I'm just pleased that we're able to kind of talk about it because I do think that I mean, to me, the question is not why do we need it, but why haven't we had one all along? You know, it's that vital a piece of equipment. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Treen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You just mentioned the troopers use this. Do they have one here in Juneau?
Who's answering that one?
Through the chair, no. To my knowledge, there are no Bearcats in Juneau. There are no Bearcats, I don't even believe, in Southeast Alaska, which would take time for somebody to get here. The closest that we've ever came was probably about 8 years ago when the chief of police was Bryce Johnson. We had some negotiations with the National Guard about their armored Humvees. But because of various statutes like the Posse Comitatus Act and things like that, and truly that would have been militarizing the police, those discussions fell through. So if the CBJ did purchase this vehicle, it would be the only one in the region that we could use. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes Candies. Sorry, I missed you.
Thanks, Madam Mayor, and no worries. And I have several questions, so I guess I'll just ask one and we'll see if other people do. So thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it and appreciate hearing from you more about it. I don't know if I think someone made reference to getting into the weeds or those more detailed things, but in a way that's helpful for me to hear about. So you kind of have alluded to with some natural disasters would be good. It would be a good vehicle for that. But I feel like at the heart of this is, you know, if you think back in the last 5 years, do certain situations come to mind where you think, oh yeah, this would have been really great to have? If you could expand even more on, you know, how often you think it would be used, what are times we would have used it in the past, and really like, you know, specific things.
Sure. Through the chair. Specifically, I can think of about 2 years ago where we had landslides up off of Wire Street. And there were a lot of debris in the road. We had first responders, both CCFR and JBD staff were walking up the street to help get to and evacuate people because it was simply unsafe for an ambulance or a fire truck to go there. So I think that is a very documented thing that we can point to. It's not within 5 years, but the most dramatic was in 2012 on Easter weekend, where we had on Back Loop Road in a pretty upscale neighborhood, we had a citizen that following a domestic dispute got into a multi-hour standoff with the police, shot up the neighborhood, where we were literally spent hours contacting people inside their houses by going through the woods and carrying them to safety as gunfire was erupting off. That's probably the most dramatic that I've been to. We had a situation about 1.5 years ago where we were trying to arrest a person who was committing felonious acts in Juneau and was on a crime spree. We were announcing it over Facebook, trying to get the public's help. One of our officers attempted to contact the individual and he shot at us. We, through good police work, figured out where he was at. and made a plan to go get him. Getting the fact that he had already demonstrated a willingness to shoot at the police and commit felonies against the people of Juneau, we viewed that as a very high-risk situation. And that was what, a year and a half ago, Craig? To the point where when we located him and we were going to go arrest him, we weren't sure how long it was going to take. And when you start talking about operations like this, you talk about, well, what happens if we get into multiple operational periods? What if this goes on 2, 3, 4, 5 days? So we actually contacted the FBI out of the Anchorage field office, and they were in the airport getting ready to board a plane when our officers contacted this person. And we ended up having about a 30, 45 minute negotiations that was done quite superbly by Lieutenant Campbell. And after 30, 40 minutes, he voluntarily gave up. That was a situation where I think that going into it, we probably would have said, wow, this is really high risk. To make sure that we're safe, we should at least have it on hand in the area. So those are some areas, I think, some situations that are in the past very articulable that we point to. But I'm a construction guy, and I never knew I needed a Sawzall until I bought a Sawzall. And now that I have the Sawzall, I'm like, wow, there's all kinds of use for the Sawzall. And I have a feeling that when we start exploring what exactly can this vehicle do and how can it be used to have the safe transportation of our first responders and our citizens, there might be more times when we come up to it. So hopefully that answered the questions. Thank you.
We have Ms. Hale, then Ms. Wall, and then we'll come back to you, Ms. Huskandes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So in that situation in particular, and the situation on the back loop road that you described, is it accurate to say that really the only protection the officers have not having a vehicle like this is their bulletproof vest?
Through the chair, yes, I think that the most important element for the back loop incident that kept our officers and our people safe was the dark of night, and that randomly spraying bullets was keeping us safe. I didn't want to get in the weeds. We have photographs of a police car that is completely shot up with dowling rods that go right through the windshield into the front target to say that this vehicle was targeted. We could probably maybe provide them for you later. They're pretty dramatic photographs, but again, I was hoping not to get too in the weeds because I didn't want to make it about that. I want to make it about the rescue capabilities of this vehicle. But I think that this vehicle definitely has the ability to save, and I think that we were talking about this last Friday, and bulletproof vests and ballistic shields, they all have ratings about what can they withstand, and they don't take as much as you would think they would, and if we're talking about fear, what scares me more than anything is a trained hunter with a high-powered rifle that's designed to stop a bear. You're not going to find a bulletproof vest or ballistic shield that would be able to stop that threat, whereas this armored vehicle would. So in a situation like that, it would be the right tool for the right job.
All right, Ms. Wall, and then Ms. Huskandes, and then Ms. Treem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And thank you for those examples. That was really helpful to hear about things that have happened in Juneau and how this would have been used in those scenarios. Some of the things I heard from the public on this was kind of concern around, this vehicle escalating a situation. And so I'm curious, are there situations where, there's a gun, but there may be, less, not as high risk as the situations you described, where you've had multiple days of, and people shooting at police, where, are there situations where, there's a firearm involved where you wouldn't be using this vehicle?
Thank you, Ms. Wall.
Through the chair, absolutely. I think the vast majority of the incidents would be handled without using the vehicle, just because you don't know what you're getting into until you get into it. So you have to know that it's there and then make the effort. It takes about I'm not going to put a timeline on it because I don't want to give away trade secrets, but it takes time to have our tactical officers and whether it's a mobile incident command respond. And oftentimes these instances are over, very, very quickly. So I think the vast majority of it would resolve itself before the vehicle, but there would be those times, a handful of times a year, when they would be protracted, they would be continuing. And that's when we would bring it in there. This would not be a part of our regular normal operations where it would roll on every single call. We handle 50,000 calls for service a year, 5,000 cases, make about 1,800 arrests. So I think that those numbers would hold, and we would only use it during the most extreme situations. I hate to say it because I think our men and women do a fantastic job, but I think that if you looked back at some of our cases, you could say that in those situations we got lucky. Now I'll take luck, but luck cuts both ways. And I don't think that when you're talking about the safety of our first responders and the safety of our citizens, that should be our go-to. Our go-to should be the right equipment for the right job.
Thank you. Ms. Hughes Candies, and then Ms. Trim, then Ms. Gladysevsky.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. To expand a little bit on Ms. Wall's question, can you foresee, I guess I'll think of one incident that just happened with the person who had called, the family member had called and said the person was waiting outside their house, suicidal. And so you knew there was a gun in that situation. For something like that, where you are aware that obviously officers are going to know that there's a little bit of an elevated threat because there is a firearm where you're arriving, do you think that it would be used for something like that? And then I don't know about whether JPD serves warrants on the regular, or can you foresee using a vehicle like this if you were serving a warrant where, again, you suspected that there was elevated risk?
Deputy Chief.
Sure. Through the chair, I don't believe with the incident at Kodzoff that this vehicle would have ever been involved, because it was, we deal with these types of calls where somebody is distraught. They may have gone on a regular basis. We would have very strict policies on when the vehicle could and could not be used. It would be only during active situations. And yes, for the search warrant situation, we do a lot of search warrants and a lot of arrest warrants. If it gets to the point where we believe that the danger to the community is such that it would require it, like when we were dealing with the guy a year and a half ago, we would use it. But would we be using it as a regular course of business for every search warrant? Absolutely not.
Lieutenant.
And yes, through the chair, and just to expand on your question, because you kind of asked about the incident that happened in Kodzoff this past 6 months. I do recall, and it's very similar to that, roughly about 3 years ago, is at the very end of the road. It was a person who was in mental crisis. They were suicidal. They had a firearm, and the police were called out there to respond. We did negotiations with that person for several hours. Especially when you get out in a situation like that, there's not a whole lot. You go out to the road kind of ends, and it's you and that person. And that person was standing outside of the vehicle with the firearm, and roughly 100, 150, 200 feet away from us, from them, is us parked with our vehicles in the middle of the road with multiple police officers. And we have no protection other than we have some regular vehicles that can withstand some things just as a normal car. But anytime someone has a gun in that situation, the danger is increased, the threat is increased, because we don't have the capabilities to protect ourselves. In a situation like that with the armored rescue vehicle, you can pull that right up, you can turn it, you can block that road, you can protect all of your officers there while they negotiate, while they continue to provide help to that person, and you increase the safety for the first responders. You actually really increase the safety for that person who's in crisis, because if they do something or do an act that is deemed like a threat to an officer may have to protect themselves. But that buffer that allows you to protect the officers and them is an excellent tool.
Deputy Chief.
Through the chair, if I can follow up on that, I guess the answer is it would be a case-by-case basis. We do train all of our officers on de-escalation techniques, and something pretty extreme would have to happen if somebody is I've had this conversation a lot, and it's kind of a hard thing to hear, but if somebody is suicidal and they're alone and they're not a threat to other people, we are not going to compound that problem by forcing contact and by trying to, take them into protective custody. If a person is alone and they're not a threat to somebody else, our go-to officer. So the current course of action is, in a situation like that, do not force the issue. Don't cause the person to do something. Now, if they're with somebody else is a threat, that's a different story. But if they're alone, then they're going to be alone. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Treem, and then Ms. Glaszewski, and then Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And my connection just went on the front, so I didn't catch the last couple of things. So hopefully I'm not repeating anything. But Ms. Hale asked a question about, is this the only thing that we could be used in certain situations? And I did want to follow up on that. And my apologies to the three of you, because you obviously know much more about this than any of us do. So these are probably really basic questions, but the police department has other equipment, right, that could be used in a situation, like ballistic shields or other things like that. Is that the case? And can you just kind of help me understand when you would use equipment like that versus this vehicle or some other kind of thing, other kind of tool that you have at your disposal?
Deputy Chief.
Sure. Through the chair. Yes, we do have ballistic vests. We do have ballistic shields. It really boils down to the right tool to the right job and what kind of threat can it assess. The vests have less protection than the shields. The shields have less protection than an armored vehicle. You're also talking about area. If we were in a hotel and we were in a long, skinny hallway, the ballistic shield would be the best protection. If we were trying to transport, large numbers of people, in this case up to 12 people, to safety, having people, crouch behind a shield, Captain American style, is just not going to work. We could load in a bunch of people into this armored vehicle that could take very high caliber weapons and transfer them to safety. So yeah, we do forecast what threats are out there, and we do train regularly. Our tactical units train once a month. And then once a year, we train with other agencies like the troopers or somebody else. And it truly is trying to figure out what threats are, or what are you dealing with, and then how do you respond appropriately. So far, we've been using, ballistic shields and whatnot, but it's worked, but it's not the best for the type of situation that we're discussing here tonight.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
All right, thank you, Ms. Stream. Ms. Glaszewski.
Can I follow up with?
Sure,
Mr.
Mr. Assistant Chief Mead, sorry.
Ms. Stream,
Thank you.
from a fire department perspective, we were issued bulletproof vests about 6 years ago. We keep at least a couple on the ambulance, on the first line apparatus, and we have Kevlar helmets. We then had active shooter training where we were taught how to wear these and function as part of a member of a team going into a warm zone to extricate. I can tell you, even with that training, I do not have a good feeling about having to assign my people to do that. Having the idea of a vehicle that we can get into that can then enter that warm zone or hostile environment that creates now a buffer between the bad guys and my people that can get out and work safely. That's what this creates. It just makes our opportunity to perform it successfully better.
Thank you.
Thank you. Your hand's still up. Did you have a follow-up or are you done?
Oh, no, I'm good. Thanks.
All right, Ms. Glaszewski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And thank you, gentlemen, for coming. This was really good information. Deputy Chief, you said a couple times when you have a hammer, everything's a nail, which causes me concern. You have a new vehicle and you want to use it. So, and the concerns we've heard from the public are about the militarization of police. So, can you talk about, you talked about everything. So if it's a hammer, then everything's a nail, but you also talked about creating policies to use this in specific situations. So can you talk about those things? And then I also have another question.
Thank you. Let's start with that one. I'm assuming that's you, Deputy Chief.
Yes, through the chair. I do love that quote. It was by Abraham Maslow, who did Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's a great quote, but what it really illustrates is that you want to use the right tool for the right job, and I think that's what we want to focus on here. Not that we're going to force the vehicle to be used in situations where it's not being used. And I understand the concerns about militarization of the police. As mentioned last week by, I believe it was Ms. Treem, the citizens of Juneau and the police department have a very good familiarity with each other or corresponds with each other. I would not want to do anything to jeopardize that. Until last week when I heard the word tank used, that was the first that it really dawned on me. And I think it was an oversight on my part, and that I truly just viewed this as a rescue vehicle. And once I realized that the concerns out there was that we were going to be militarizing the police, I was embarrassed by the fact that I didn't recognize that is the way this would be perceived. So I'm thrilled to be here tonight to try to set the record straight of what exactly this is. I think that I've been with this agency 27 years. When I retire, I'm going to live in this town for a long, long time. I want to make sure that the relationships between the citizens and the Juneau stay very, very high, because at some point in time, I'm going to be just a citizen in this town, and I wouldn't do anything to jeopardize that. On a larger scale, when you start looking at the differences between fear and perception versus safety, I'll take safety anytime.
All right, Ms. Gladaszewski, you had a follow-up question? You're still muted if you're talking.
Oh, I was talking. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I totally was talking. Thank you, Deputy Chief, for that explanation. I really appreciate it, because there is that concern, and it seems the concern is now you have a new vehicle and you'll be driving it around a bunch. And I appreciate your coming out and explaining that. And I understand Juneau's all by itself. And so if we need one of these, it's why you can't just call your neighboring department for one. But can you talk, does Anchorage have one of these? How about Fairbanks? Are there someone on the road system in Alaska? We're only 30,000 people. Is our chief and you just proactive to get one, or what do these look like elsewhere in the state? You did mention that the troopers had one, but do other police departments in the state have one?
Through the chair, I'm actually going to pass this off to Lieutenant Campbell. I think I've spoken quite enough already, and I want to give my other comrades here a chance to be heard. And he's done a lot of research. Lieutenant Campbell is the tactical operations supervisor for all of JPD. He interacts with our partners. He is the subject matter expert, and he's the best person to answer this question. So it's all yours.
Lieutenant Campbell.
Thank you. To the chair, I could get some of the numbers wrong, but I do know that Anchorage has a Lenco Bearcat. They may have 2 of them, and they may have another version of an armored vehicle they're trying to get. Alaska State Troopers, I believe, have 3 of them. I don't know if Fairbanks has one, or they may be trying to get one. Fairbanks does have an MRAP, which is a refurbished military vehicle through their 1033 program. So there are several other agencies within Alaska that have versions of an armored vehicle.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. Any further questions? Ms. Hughes Candies. Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me, Mr. Smith. Sorry, I passed you. I even have you on my list. Mr. Smith and then Museum.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Somewhat following up on Ms. Gladaszewski's question about the concern I've been hearing is militarization of police, escalating a situation. I don't know if you're, when you develop the policies, if you Obviously, this has generated some attention. I don't know if you'd be willing to share those or if that would be antithetic to the mission, but are there other ways? You had mentioned paint, about de-escalating or mitigating some of that concern of this being a militarization type vehicle. Are there other things that you're thinking of?
Through the chair, I'll refer this to Craig as well, since he's the expert.
And through the chair, I guess what I heard, are you talking about just painting a different color so people think, hey, it doesn't look quite so military. We haven't necessarily thought about that. Green was a color we went because that is a color for part of our teams. And I think that the color itself is probably, if I could speak out of turn, that's probably not the defining characteristics of it that people are concerned of. I think the term militarization of the police can be very broad, and it probably really needs to be more defined of like, well, what does that mean? Does that mean medical equipment that the military created, civilians can't use? I mean, does it mean a Jeep that the military use, civilians can't use? Does it mean fully automatic machine guns? I think I would go, yeah, we don't need that. That's military equipment. Get rid of that. But there is a lot of equipment that is used by the military that is available for purchase for ordinary citizens, and it has a lot more capabilities that are defensive or strategic versus offensive. And I think people are really concerned about the offensive capabilities of a military vehicle, and that's not what the armored rescue vehicle is.
Okay, for the record, red with rescue on it would be very appropriate. Deputy Chief, you want to add on to that?
Yeah.
Deputy Chief, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, through the chair, I would just like to expound a little bit on what Lieutenant Campbell said as far as you know, the concerns about overuse of the vehicle. I think that our policies, once it's written, would be very clear on when it would and would not be used. Right now, we have policies on when we would or would not use our tactical units. And basically, it requires notification through the chain of command, and they wouldn't be used unless they were authorized by either Lieutenant Campbell, myself, or Chief Mercer. So this armored rescue vehicle would fall under that. So I don't think you're going to have, you know, the newest rookie out of the academy saying, hey, let's jump in the armored rescue vehicle and away we go. We would have a notification through the chain, part of our policy, to make sure that it would only be authorized under very extreme situations by someone like Lieutenant Campbell's level or higher. And I think that the policy issue would help. If you look at our mobile incident command, our tactical motorhome, you know, type of thing, we only have a very small handful of people that can drive it. And I think it's probably about 5 or 6 people in the entire department. And when it comes time to use that vehicle, it goes through the same process where it goes through the chain of command to get authorization to use it. And then we call out one of the special trained people to make our mobile incident command mobile to get it to where it needs to go. And the armored rescue vehicle would have the same type of parameters placed on it.
All right, any follow-up there, Mr. Smith? Okay, Ms. Hughes-Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was going to start with a comment. I thank you all for being here and for the extra information. I just want to say for my own part, with no true shade to the manager's office, I really feel like any comments we made about this kind of coming out of nowhere were directed at the manager's office, not so much at the police department. So let them fall on that sphere. I think, kind of touching on what Mr. Smith said, there's a perception from the community that when we talk about militarization of the police, which is this really broad, what exactly does that mean? There's the sense that maybe when we use language like hot zones and warm zones and hostiles, there's a perception that we don't want the police department to view the community as sort of this war zone. And I think that is one thing I really love about Juneau, is the relationship that the community has with the police department and the fire department, and the work that those departments do to foster that relationship. So are there now I'm going to turn it back to a question about the vehicle itself, but are there other vehicles in the fleet for those sort of natural disaster situation? The fact that it's built on a Ford F-550, is there any other thing that's not an ambulance, a fire truck, or a police car? Do you have anything that's kind of an all-purpose vehicle like so many other CBJ vehicles?
Through the chair, I'll ask Travis Mead afterward, but for us, the answer is no. We have Ford Explorers, we have Ford Tauruses, we have our motorhome, and that's pretty much it for us. We have an old ambulance that I think was on the verge of being decommissioned that that our bomb techs can use to travel with some of their equipment. It gets used very, very limited. We have a full-size conversion van to transport our tactical units in now, but it's just a white van. So as far as a specialty built vehicle, no. I think that when you start talking about concepts like militarization of the police, I think that a lot of times it's rooted in sometimes fear of the unknown, which is why I'm thrilled to be here today, so we can talk about what this vehicle is and what it isn't. So I don't know if it would be appropriate, but I know that they have, and Mr. Manager, help me out here, that what's called day of play thing where kids can come and crawl around the fire trucks and the other things. Maybe it would be appropriate to bring the armed rescue vehicle there so people can see it firsthand. Or we've talked about having an open house at the police department at some point in time, where we can open up the mobile command, the army vehicle. Maybe we could engage in a little bit more interactions and community outreach, so that if somebody sees it, they realize it really is just a big armored shell. It's like Ford's version of a turtle. It just safely transports people. So I think that there might be some ways that we could do outreach to try to alleviate some of those concerns as far as militarization with this rescue vehicle. Travis, you want to talk about the capabilities of the fire department?
Absolutely. And I would touch base. I was using the term hot, warm, and cold zones. That's very common in the fire department. It's how we kind of stratify the levels of risk and where we're going to operate and stage. As far as apparatus, like I mentioned earlier, we have some ATVs, some four-wheelers. At one time, there was a vehicle on the airport ground. It was a Hagelin vehicle that was a tracked rig, and it was very expensive to maintain and ended up going away. Beyond that, beyond the ATVs, we have some rescue boats that we use quite often to go across that lake and perform rescues. We have some utility trucks that are four-wheel drive pickup trucks and on 1 ton or 3/4 ton chassis. Nothing that is really designed to carry people inside of a protected environment that we can do. I have some SUV that we drive around as a command vehicle. We do have a large, what we call Rescue One. It's a large box style vehicle that we have all of our special rescue equipment in, Cascade air supply system in it. There's no seats in it. It's standing only. I have transported people, my workers, in that while standing into an environment, which at the time, that's what we had to do. Beyond that, it's ambulances. I've got 2 ambulances that are 2-wheel drive ambulances. They're the van style ambulances that you've probably seen for years, because they're probably 30 years old at this point and they're still going strong, but they're very limited on what they can do. We try not to take them to Eagle Crest in the wintertime because of the conditions of the road. Beyond that, we have box style ambulances are the 2 main frontline ambulances. And they're the only thing that we have that are designed to transport a person in a supine position.
Did that answer your question, Ms. Hughes Candy?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Mr. Bryson has one, then we'll come back to you.
I think I can help with the militarization question. One time I got an alarm, went to my business in the middle of the night, and I was greeted by one of the officers at the door, and he had either an AR-15 or an M16. I don't know which which style is it that JPD carries? It's a machine. Well, it would be this, in my eyes, it was the same rifle that a soldier would carry, correct? Or that's how I saw it. I mean, they look the same. They have large magazines. It was an assault style rifle. That was the only time in my entire time of working with JPD that I saw a JPD officer with that type of rifle. They didn't know if there was a suspect in the building, so they responded. So could maybe we take I don't want to call it a machine gun, but the rifle. Do you guys have a policy for when somebody could get a rifle out as opposed to their their sidearm? Would there be policy? Is there do you guys have rules or regulations that they would use for that high level piece of equipment, which is, it's a weapon as opposed to this is a rescue? And I thought maybe you could just explain to us what officers would have to go through in order to pull out an elevated piece of firearm. And we can maybe understand, what you guys go through to decide, do we need a bigger hammer, so to speak? I hope that wasn't too complicated of a question.
That was a little complicated, Mr. Bryson, but Mr. Deputy Chief Campbell's up for the task.
Sure. Through the chair, I think that we could debate the merits and differences between an AR-15 or an M16. They do look very, very similar. They function very, very differently. We do not have our officers issued with the M16s. However, all of our officers are assigned an AR-15. And that's from the chief all the way down. And the reason why is because, again, it's the right tool, for the job. And if you're talking about armed conflict, handguns we carry them with them everywhere we go because they're with us everywhere we go. But if an officer is going to encounter a situation where there is a high probability of using a firearm, the appropriate tool of the job is the rifle. And the reason why is because it is much more accurate. And you don't have to worry about things like over-penetration or things along that line. You would never use an AR-15 against a bear. And then all of our police cars have 12-gauge shotguns in them. And the shotgun would be used for a bear. So it gets back to the same question of the right tool, for the right job. We do train extensively on our weapons. I don't know the specifics of what happened when you were met with that officer. If there was something that would have elevated concerns that they might get into a situation, then it would have been appropriate for them to have them. But I don't know the specifics. I could probably look it up for you if you had data or whatnot. So I think that in getting back to the armored rescue vehicle, we would have very clear policies as to when it will and will not be used. For CCFR's purposes, it would be authorized to be used only if we needed to transport people in a situation where it would be unsafe for their other vehicles to do so. For us, we would only use it if it was active situations involving live fire evacuations or transporting people, or if we had to deal with a very substantial threat like the one I talked about where the person had already fired on the police. It would be very narrowly defined, whereas an individual officer makes the choice based on the facts of whether he's going to go into a situation with a rifle or not. It would be inappropriate for an officer to have to call his lieutenant every single time he went to a call to say, hey, can I or can I not use my long firearm, my rifle? But it would be appropriate to have officers run it through the chain of command to see whether it would fit to use the armored rescue vehicle or not. So I think a lot of the issues would be handled by policy. Did I answer your question, sir?
I think your answer was more helpful than my question, but thank you very much for the time. Thank you, sir.
All right, Ms. Hughes Cannies, looks like you have the last question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My last question might also not be that great of a question. I guess it's just maybe the best way to say would be a hypothetical sort of like thought experiment I would love to have you expand on, which will take it home for making me understand this. But hypothetically, officer safety, first responder safety is crucial. So obviously we want you to have the tools that you need to stay safe while you're out there. So I was at an airport all day with nothing but my packet. So I went down a rabbit hole reading about Bearcats and reading about all the sort of safety equipment that's out there. And hypothetically, if you had a kind of purpose-built Ford F-50 takes you where you need to go in a natural disaster situation, and you had another vehicle that was bulletproof, would having those two vehicles take care of this? And you see this as combining those two into one? I guess the question would be, what if you had both? Would that do what you needed? And two, is this those two combined?
Thank you, Ms. Hughes Candies, Deputy Chief.
Through the chair, I have a long list of items I would love to buy. And multiple vehicles sounds great. But I also recognize that it's our job as leaders to be fiscally responsible. And given the fact that I believe we're only going to be using it a handful of times a year, I think that having it be a dual purpose vehicle that both CCFR and JPD uses is the smart financial thing to do. It also would only be one vehicle to maintain and to service, which would be easier when it comes to oil changes and tires and those types of things. So in a perfect world, yeah, I think that having multiple vehicles would be great. But I think that given what this vehicle does and how it can be used by both organizations, and I know we focused a lot on first responders here, but it truly is a situation where every citizen in this town could potentially find use for this if it is a natural disaster, a man-made disaster. And I think that it's in my humble opinion, it's long overdue. And I wish we already had one, but we don't. And I think that the only reason why we are able to do it now is because of the grant funding that we have, to where Mr. Barr, I think what 90% is covered through the grant or something like that. I don't know the exact numbers, but I think that we'd be having much different conversation if we came here saying we'd like you to pony up the entire cost. So I hope that answers your question.
Ms. Hughes Candies, do you have a follow-up on that? Or are you good?
No, thank you. That's helpful. I was imagining a world where fiscal concerns are not yours to manage, but I know that's not the case.
All right. We had lots and lots of questions, and I feel a little shift in the assembly. So before we look for a real motion, I'm asking the assembly, do we want to treat this as an informational item and thank these gentlemen, which would mean we would continue with the purchase, or do we want to actually take action on this item? Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do feel like a lot of people have, or certainly I've asked a lot of questions, so I got a lot of questions answered, but I feel like that's very helpful. I don't feel like it would be a bad thing if we discussed it a little bit as an assembly to truly feel like we've reached consensus, but that's just my own preference.
Okay, well, we'll do that. We do have a motion in the wings if needed, but for right now, this is the time for statements. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. One of the basic rules is it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. And I would like to thank these gentlemen for their informational item, Madam Mayor.
Mr. Bryson, I see Ms. Treem and Ms. Gladszewski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, gentlemen, for all of the answers tonight. I think a lot of the concerns I had have been assuaged, and I feel a lot better about this and moving forward with it. I do want to say at a broader level, and now my comments are not going to be focused at JPD, they're going to be focused at us in the assembly and somewhere on the manager's office. I think that we still have a lot of work to do when it comes to the issue of police transparency and accountability. 2 summers ago, we had that listening session and we heard from a big part of the community who I think we normally don't hear from. And I think we normally don't hear from them because they probably correctly feel like this system is not responsive to their concerns. And I don't think we have been responsive to the concerns that they brought up in 2020 and that summer. I think we have a lot of work to do when it comes to the issue of accountability and transparency. And we heard tonight a lot about the policies, JPD's policies. We discussed those a lot in 2020. I totally understand the need to have safety in our minds when we are discussing those policies, but I think we need to be discussing them more. 2 years ago, I had grand visions of a way, maybe like an accountability board or something. And then of course, 99 million other things happen and we lose focus on certain issues. I'd like to bring that focus back. I think that it's still an issue that we need to be discussing and working on. We were asked by constituents to do that 2 years ago. I think that we've kind of failed them in that regard. So again, I really appreciate you guys being here tonight for those questions. This is the kind of conversation I think we need to be having more frequently, and ideally under different circumstances where it's not kind of a last minute thing for everybody involved. So those are my comments tonight, directing them at us on the assembly and you guys in the manager's office. I'm pointing at the little box that you're in. Of course, you can't see me do that, but I hope we don't forget to keep working on this issue.
Thank you, Ms. Treem. Ms. Gladaszewski, or except for you put your hand down.
No, I put it down. I'm good. Madam, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just briefly, I basically echo Ms. Treem's comments. I had a lot of questions about this vehicle. I think you've provided good information. I think that we just need more of this. And it's interesting that it was a surprise to you, Deputy Chief, and I could totally see how that could be because you're focused on your task and keeping your officers safe and that. And then there's a big, broad community that has other ideas, and we heard from a number of them concerned about this vehicle. But I think you've answered them for the vehicle. But I just continue to think we need a more conversation like this, so we don't have more misunderstandings. But thanks for the info, and I'm ready to move forward.
Thank you, Ms. Gladaszewski. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate my colleagues' comments. I wasn't sure if we were joking about the color, but for me, I think this vehicle definitely needs to be a different color. I don't care if that's white or red, but it can't look like what's in these pictures here. I just think that it may seem small, but I think it goes a long way towards people understanding what it's for, and in the moment, feeling like this thing is coming to help them, as opposed to something else.
Thank you, Ms. Wall, and I was joking too, but I wasn't really joking. Ms. Tail, you look like you were going to come to your mic, or do you have a comment?
No, I'm good. Just great appreciation for what you've given us here tonight. Thank you.
Ms. Hughes Candies and then Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think, I'll try to keep it briefer. Echo, I appreciate the comments of others have made so far. I asked the hypothetical question of the difference in the two vehicles because while spending a lot of time looking into the various safety equipment, they're kind of two different things that I would like us to have. I'd like us to have something that keeps the officers safe and the fire staff safe. But I would love it if I didn't know which one it was driving by. And it just looked like another police vehicle. And I would love it if it looked like an ambulance and I didn't know. And the reason is I do think that perception, which ties back to the color, is so important. And it goes both ways. It's a relationship that the public safety views the citizens as the citizens they serve and live with and will become when they retire, and that the community views our first responders as people that they don't need to fear and who are there to help them and to serve them. And I think to echo Ms. Stream, that's something that for us as the Assembly, we really have to keep first and foremost in our mind, especially if that's something that we take for granted. If we always feel happy to see the police or happy to see the firefighters. And I always have when because I've had need of first responders on both fronts. And I've been glad to see them. But we shouldn't open our doors and our ears to the community. The community was really vulnerable during those listening sessions. And I am just going to echo that I think we need to take this seriously and make sure that we're responding to those concerns. So in this case where we have a grant, financially, it might make sense then to continue down this road. But I just think that's something we need to think about, and in this case, then make a huge effort to, yes, have people able to see it and feel comfortable knowing that it is a rescue vehicle, because it's that armored piece that can make some people view it as a weapon. When I look at that picture, although that's not a Humvee, to me, I would describe that as, I would not see that as out of place if someone told me that was a military vehicle. I would say, sure, it looks like a military vehicle. I don't know the specifications on our particular order, but I know that the Lenco homepage speaks of gun ports and uses IEDs and speaks how it's the ideal vehicle for first responders and military. So the kind of specifications that you can make do make it open to being something that hopefully it sounds like ours will not be. I really appreciate you being here tonight and answering questions. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes Candies. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just wanted to thank you all for coming in and speaking to us, getting some more information out there. And yeah, hope this vehicle can keep you safe and improve the safety of our community as well. So thank you for coming in.
Anything further from anybody? Thank you, gentlemen. I share many of my colleagues' thoughts, not all, but many. But I think you're getting a pretty loud and clear message that we're seeing it as safety of the officers and safety of the fire department and safety for the civilians. And please keep that in mind when you're looking at your policies, and red it will be. So I'm just making sure everybody on the assembly is good, that that's okay. We'll treat it as an informational. And again, thank you for answering all the questions. I had a whole list and everybody asked my questions, so that's why I was pretty quiet tonight, but we appreciate all you're doing and thank you so much. With that, Mr. Manager, do we have anything further?
Nothing further for the body. Thank you.
All right, anything further from the assembly? We are adjourned.